Earlier this month, Marvel announced Zeb Wells' run on Amazing Spider-Man is coming to an end. Now, in a surprise release of Moon Knight Fist of the Khonshu #0, Marvel revealed who will be taking over from Wells as the next Amazing Spider-Man writer. The new writer will be veteran Marvel comic book writer Joe Kelly, and Joe Kelly happens to be one of Doc's favorite comic book writers just in general.
I am a big fan of Joe Kelly. I've always thought he did really, really good work. I was a big fan of him on a number of different projects he's done in the past. He was on X-Men in the 90s, and he actually has a history. He was part of that Spider-Man brain trust during the 3 times a month era of ASM back post One More Day.
Absolutely. But he has been working at Marvel Comics lately. And this is my issue, Doc. I read Nonstop Spider-Man. I think Chris Bachalo was the artist there.
Yep.
And while it looked cool, it's a weird book. It doesn't read great. And right now I'm reading Spider-Man Wolverine. I'm sorry, not Spider-Man. Deadpool Wolverine WW3 with Joe Kelly with, I think it's Adam Kubert on art. And while there's some good concepts there, I'm just not feeling the way he's actually telling the story. Is he past his sell-by date?
I don't know. I've been a fan of the guy for a very, very long time. I've always thought he's done good work, but I had some of the same gripes on Nonstop Spider-Man, as well as I guess it would have been Savage Spider-Man. That was kind of the second volume of that. I don't know if he was bored. I don't know if he was frustrated. I don't know what it was, but he seemed to kind of go a little off the rails. Maybe it's a little bit of him just being out of the monthly comic grind, or maybe he's just like, yeah, fuck it, I'm old. Let's be experimental.
Well, it's a different Marvel Comics than when he was in his heyday and he was doing a lot of in continuity, ongoing work. He's doing the Spider-Man book. He is going to have to tie into literally every single event. And they're going to have 3 or 4 a year.
Yeah, and that may be a bit of a problem because he is going to have to tie into a lot of events because Spider-Man is the book at Marvel, and it is going to be the book that ties into everything else all the time just because it's Spider-Man.
It can't be worse than Zeb Wells, right?
Yeah, it really can't be worse than Zeb. It seems like Zeb had an idea, maybe kind of, sort of, in the beginning, and then just kind of forgot what that idea was, and he's just been trying to capture an idea ever since. And it hasn't been very good. I'll still take, like, kind of off his game Joe Kelly over peak of his career, Zeb Wells anytime. Prior to Hellions, Zeb Wells had been nothing but a seat filler. Looking back in hindsight with how bad the rest of the X-line, Zeb Wells was only good by comparison, but it was enough to get him the ASM gig. At Joe Kelly's peak, he puts Zeb Wells to absolute shame.
It also kind of signals a different, maybe approach, perspective from Marvel Comics with so much failure almost across the line, trying to establish new writers, but not really doing it successfully. We do have JMS right now on Captain America. Now we have Joe Kelly returning to Amazing Spider-Man. Maybe they're going to go with some established writers. Although I did feel like this was really almost out of left field.
It kind of, sort of, a little bit felt a lot like the way that the X-line is going, where most of the people that are in it were just the people that happened to say yes.
I don't think ASM is anywhere near as damaged as X-Men. And being the SM writer, you don't have to be in the X-Men group and tie into what other people are doing in their other stories. Certainly you do have to do that in events, but as the writer on Amazing Spider-Man, he's basically going to be driving the ship. So I do think ASM is a much more valuable, enviable position to have at Marvel Comics right now than Uncanny X-Men or even X-Men right now.
I don't disagree at all with that. I think that the ASM position is still far, far, far more enviable. And I don't think it's anywhere near as damaged. It's just looked at as boring at the moment.
Joe Kelly is known for working with awesome artists. I don't suppose John Romita Jr. is going to continue on with ASM. It sounds like he's leaving as well. Has a relationship with Ed McGuinness, has a relationship with Kuberts, got a relationship with Chris Bachalo. Do we know who the artist is, or do you have an idea who you would like to be the artist on this with Joe Kelly?
I would love to see Chris Bachalo but I don't think he really has all that much interest in a monthly ongoing at this point. Again, I don't want to speak for the guy because I don't know him. It seems like he's tapped out every time he's been on an ongoing, like a monthly book for a while now. I feel like that's probably my wish list artist out of those that he's worked with and who has a little bit of a history doing Spider-Man. Gerardo Sandoval would be another good choice. I think you could probably get him to get Ed McGuinness. And I don't know if necessarily Marvel would want him this close to the times that he worked on it with Zeb Wells. It'll be reminding people of the disappointment that was Zeb Wells' run. I'd say if it wasn't Bacalo or Ed McGuinness, Gerardo Sandoval would be probably my choice.
So I'm seeing a lot of rumors out there that this is going to be a temporary assignment. That's going to be like 18 months possibly. And he's going to be like the Beyond era, but by himself. Basically, he's just going to be in there for a short period before they reboot it, I guess, to a #1 issue again. That would be disappointing, but I wouldn't be surprised if that is the case, but that is a prevalent rumor I'm seeing around.
Like the minute that I saw this announcement, I'm like, okay, he's the stopgap in the interim here while they figure out who they want on this book, or until somebody that they already reached out to, clears up a commitment or something and is able to officially take on the book, kind of the same way that they did with the Beyond era, or when they did the X-Men line until Jonathan Hickman became available.
Joe Kelly, like Zeb Wells, was a member of the Spider-Man Brain Trust during the Brand New Day era of Amazing Spider-Man. Will be taking over Spider-Man at some point during the end of the year. Kelly is most famous for writing Deadpool's first ongoing series, which launched in 1997 with artist Ed McGuinness. Kelly has been one of the most important Deadpool writers in the character's history and previously wrote Spider-Man Deadpool ongoing series as well. So at least he has a good feel for jokes and how to put that into the comic book. Obviously, that's been a big part of Spider-Man for a long time. He's had success. He's been able to take something that wasn't completely fleshed out yet and really made Deadpool into a phenomenon, not to take any credit away from Rob Liefeld or other creators there. But Joe Kelly is the guy that really put Deadpool on the map, and really the Deadpool that we know and love today is the Joe Kelly Deadpool. So that we know that he's at least got the creativity to do something special that really impacts and changes a character.
Yeah, I mean, look, the guy's a great writer, and I see him doing that again this time around, filling a different role with the character this time around.
So what do you think he's going to do different than Zeb Wells when it comes to Spider-Man? Now, he doesn't have the biggest portfolio of work on Spider-Man himself, but he has written the character. He did a recent miniseries, I guess 2 recent miniseries. He did Deadpool, Spider-Man. We know kind of what Joe Kelly thinks about the character. When I think about what Zeb Wells thinks about Spider-Man, he thinks he's a loser. He's really, really bad luck. Nobody wants to work with him. Not really all that much of a hero, kind of a passenger zone comic book. I'm feeling Joe Kelly's going to take a different direction with it.
It's probably going to be a much more traditional Spider-Man direction. I mean, it's going to be a fun book, a funny book, if I were a betting man. But it's also going to try to tell a slightly heartfelt story. Joe doesn't really delve into certain things if editorial hasn't really decided what the future plan is. And say for the Peter MJ relationship right now, it may be entirely up in the air in editorial on exactly how they plan to handle it, what the dynamic's going to be in the future. And if that's the case, while Joe's on the book, I would say he just doesn't even touch MJ. He just leaves it alone.
She's just sitting over there with Paul.
I don't even know if she'll be sitting there with Paul. She just won't even.
He might be
addressed.
done.
Yeah. Well, no. What I mean is, he's one of those writers that if it's not clear where editorial wants to go with a character, he just doesn't touch them at all. Because
my point is, I think before Zeb Wells is done, they're going to make him get rid of Paul because the character has been so poorly received and it's just almost a liability to the Spider-Man brand.
Oh, I agree completely. But if they're not sure what they're going to do with Peter and MJ's status, Joe's one of those guys that would be like, fine, I'm just not touching it, because he doesn't want to write himself or whoever's following him into a corner if they're not sure of where the plan's going in the future.
The announcement itself, or the reveal itself, was really out of left field. Marvel did a surprise release of Moon Knight Fist of Khonshu, releasing a 0 issue next week, with comic book retailers having to order the book right now to receive them. In the meantime, some comic book stores received a special variant edition of Moon Knight Fist of Khonshu 0 this week, and on the packaging of the comic book, it notes that it also includes a preview of the next era for Amazing Spider-Man, and Joe Kelly is revealed as the new writer. That was really, really strange, but it does seem like they at least had this kind of happening. They planned out that they needed to remove Wells for some time, and I've heard that they've been looking for his replacement for almost a year at this point.
Yeah, that's not terribly surprising. I mean, he's one of those very, very reliable creators that they're like, okay, you know what? We don't know where we're going. We don't know what we're doing. Let's call him, have him do a fill-in run. And then by the time we figure it out, he'll basically be done with whatever story he's doing, and we can move forward. And I feel like that's kind of where they're at and where Joe's responsibility on this is.
Yeah, so I'm pretty excited about this because I was expecting Jerry Duggan coming off of Iron Man and obviously X-Men, maybe a Marinko Tamaki. It really seems like they still want to make her a big name at Marvel or DC. Maybe, I don't know, maybe even a Jackson Lanzig, Colin Kelly, Chris Can't Write Well type of name that they would like to elevate. And I'm very happy that they're turning to the past with somebody with some actual bona fides, some credentials, some actual success in comic books, specifically at Marvel Comics. I don't know what you were expecting, but I imagine you had to be really relieved once you learned it was Joe Kelly. Does this mean you're going to go back and at least check out Amazing Spider-Man again?
I'd say most likely I'll probably just start picking it up again. Even if it is not, you know, if it's a story that doesn't set the world on fire, I know it's going to be reliable. It's probably going to be well constructed, and it's probably at the bare minimum just going to be flat out fun. Even if I'm not getting a Spider-Man title that is, setting the world on fire and really telling completely new, groundbreaking Spider-Man stories, I'm good with just, reliable and consistent and something that when I walk into the comic shop, I can be like, all right, I got my ASM. Now I can go home.
Because a lot of people associate you with X-Men and they don't realize your Spider-Man collection is also quite enormous. This is your other anchor book that actually keeps you going to your comic book shop and supporting everything that's going on there. And you made it through a lot of the Dan Slott stuff. You were really excited about the Nick Spencer stuff, but the Zeb Wells stuff just basically turned you off almost immediately, if I remember correctly.
I didn't understand why they needed to entirely basically bitch out Peter in the first fucking issue. And then the fact that they never addressed any of the big mysteries that they set up. Look, if you're not even going to tell me a consistent story, whether or not I like the story or not, I mean, we can figure that. I'll figure that out later. What I do need to know, you have a story to tell, and it wasn't just a hook to get me to buy the first issue that you're then going to almost immediately drop because you already, suckered me into buying the book. That's the thing that it felt like with the Zeb Wells run. Like, hey, you set up a mystery that you promptly ignored because you had no intention of ever paying it off. And that's what really drove me away on the title. There were periods where it almost got me back, but never anything consistent and never anything all that great.
So thinking about Amazing Spider-Man, not the other Spider-Man books, because there's a lot of other Spider-Man books out there. In the annals of time, where does Zeb Wells' Amazing Spider-Man run rank? Is it the worst? Is it among the worst? Is it just average?
I wouldn't say it's the worst. I think a lot of the issues in the early to mid 200s were just the same type of forgettable. I feel like that's the appropriate term here for almost all of Zeb Wells' run. Forgettable and irrelevant.
Chasm's not going to be a thing. Nobody really likes Paul. Everybody hates MJ's Jackpot. Almost everything big that he did just flopped on its face and is already irrelevant, and he's not even off the book yet.
Like the Colors era of X-Men or a number of other different eras on different titles where you're going to need reminded that it even happened because it's that forgettable.
Like the Chichester Daredevil stuff that everyone forgot about?
Yeah, the DG Chichester. Yeah. Everybody forgot that it even occurred.
Oh, yeah, he did have a black suit.
Yeah.
Oh, we forgot about that because it was completely irrelevant by the time he ended.
Yes. And that's where you're going to end up with, I think, Zeb Wells' run. It's going to be something that people are going to need to be reminded of to even acknowledge or recognize. So I don't think by any stretch is it the worst or one of the worst. It's just forgettable and generally irrelevant. Kind of the same way Zeb Wells' entire career was until he got on Hellions.
Well, and that's irrelevant now, too, because everyone wants to forget Krakoa.
Yeah. So the forgotten guy gets forgotten again.
I do want to say thank you very much to Doc for joining me today, talking about the new writer on ASM, kind of putting a bow on Zeb Wells' time, at least right now. We might cover it again because he probably will be there almost to the end of the year. If you would like this full conversation, because we did edit it down for YouTube, as well as our full conversation about these new X-Men titles out there, you do need to go over to Think Critical Patreon. For the Doc is Right tier, we do have a free trial period right now. If you want more Doc in your life, we've got like 3-4 hours of Doc every single week on Patreon. There's a link in the video description.